Hello and welcome to the channel. We are the Hologrumps. I am Colum.
And I'm Liam.
And we're here today to talk to you about synthetic life and all the rights that are afforded to it, or lack thereof. But before we do that, we are a discussion channel, and if we could get you to like, subscribe, leave us a comment, we'd love to reply to your comments. We love actually answering comments, so feel free to do that.
And especially if you'd like us to cover anything in extra videos that we do. And if it's really pressing, we will make a video.
Having watched the recent episodes of CBS's new show, Star Trek Picard, we couldn't help but think that cybernetic life forms in Trek canon have kind of gotten a raw deal. This all started us thinking about past episodes of The Next Generation and Voyager especially, which featured the question of sentient life forms that are non-organic. Now, this is obviously disregarding the first Star Trek movie, because it's the first Star Trek movie.
Yes, and also in this discussion we'll be covering synthetic life forms in the form of holograms as well as androids. So we've come to the conclusion in our discussions that a synthetic revolt was inevitable, and we will back this up as we go along. But all you have to do is take a look at the lives they lived, the forced labour, living in little boxes, and of course, the horrible jumpsuits. All this was after granting Data the right to self-determination. Now, this isn't to say that androids in this episode were actually sentient, but we have seen in other iterations of Star Trek that it wouldn't have really mattered all that much, and we will cover that. So as we saw in Maps and Legends, the android F8 seemingly was overridden by something else and was made to destroy the Utopia Planitia Shipyards. But it's clear that Starfleet has, over its history, displayed a lack of empathy and awareness toward synthetic life forms. But it all started off with Measure of a Man, so let's go back to this episode briefly. And this was the first indication that Starfleet wasn't really sure what to do with their new synthetic life forms.
I mean, how did Data even make it that far? Our first instance of Starfleet addressing sentient synthetic life forms comes in the conundrum of Measure of a Man. Now, in Data's hearing, if you don't know the premise, it is basically the self-determination of Data and whether or not he has the rights afforded to all other sentient life forms, and that's the entire premise of the episode. But Picard argues, as he's at the hearing for Data's life, that a single Data is a curiosity, a wonder even, but thousands, isn't that becoming a race? He goes on to say, the decision you reach here today will determine how we will regard this creation of genius, what he is destined to be, this one android. Are you prepared to condemn him and all who will come after him to servitude and slavery?
Which coincidentally is exactly what they do to the holograms later on, which we will cover.
Here we see Picard supporting the sentience of cybernetic life, and it's only begrudgingly that Starfleet supports him. Picard has in fact had encounters with non-organic life. A sentient hologram, for instance. In the Next Generation episode, Ship in a Bottle, and the episode Elementary, Dear Data, Picard is forced to face off against a nefarious hologram based off the villainous character James Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes novel by Arthur Conan Doyle. A hologram inadvertently afforded the potential to outsmart Commander Data, which is an impressive feat. The episode brings to light the question of synthetic sentience again with regards to holograms with these quotes.
Now this is after the character of Moriarty has already gained his sentience, and he has this impassioned plea or argument with Picard. He's quoted as saying, "Whatever I was, I have grown. I am understanding more and more." He goes on, "I want to continue to exist." Picard states that he is a mere hologram, a holographic image, that he is not alive. Moriarty states, "I know, but are you sure? Is the definition of life, I think, therefore I am," and Picard says that it's one possibility. Moriarty says, "I am alive, and I am aware of my own consciousness. I want my existence." So, it's clear in The Next Generation that Picard and the other members of the Enterprise crew did grow to see Moriarty as a sentient life form, and as stated later on, even in Star Trek Voyager, Moriarty was referred to as a sentient hologram, and they created this device that Moriarty could live out his days in that would just keep generating new worlds for him. So why do you think that was, Colin? Do you think they agreed that he was sentient?
I think it was twofold. First of all, I think it was because they agreed he was sentient, no doubt. And second of all, it was to keep him out of their hair. Because he was based on a villainous character. And despite all he could try and all he could say, it was in his core programming to be villainous and nefarious to achieve his own ends. So putting him in his own little box where he could play with all his toys seemed like a good idea. It seems to me that the opinion of the Enterprise D does not represent the opinion of Starfleet as a whole. And you start to see that consistently throughout all the episodes and all the series of Star Trek, that the opinions of the ship aren't actually the opinions of Starfleet.
It's clear that even though they see him as a sentient being that has a right to exist, they still don't grant him the right to a real reality. Because I suppose any type of nefarious character like that maybe deserves to be put in prison, but he was having this outpour because he just felt that he was being denied the right to exist in an actual world.
And what if he had been given the right to exist? Well, we have a hologram later on in Star Trek who was given the right to exist permanently, so to speak. And that's the Doctor from Voyager.
The EMH Mark 1.
Synthetic life and the rights of synthetic life feature heavily in latter episodes of the series run of Voyager. The most memorable being the episode Author, which sees the Doctor write a holonovel of the USS Vortex, an almost satirical parody of Voyager and its crew. When issues of distribution are raised during the episode, it becomes clear that the holograms have no rights at all. After all this time, instead they are forced to work on garbage ships and mining colonies, slaving away because they're viewed as defective because of their personalities.
I mean, we see in earlier episodes of Voyager as well that Cass says to the Doctor, "Why do you let them treat you like this?" And he just says, "Well, I've become accustomed to being referred to like a hypospray." They treat him like this because he has this ingrained rudeness, I suppose. But imagine in today's society, if people were merely forced into slavery simply because they didn't have an agreeable personality. And it's not fair on the EMH Mark 1s because they didn't get the right to choose their own personality or even the opportunity to develop it. They were active maybe minutes before they were transferred to these dilithium mines. Janeway asks him about the holonovel that he's written, and is it because he feels oppressed? And he says, "Of course not. The real victims are my brothers in the Alpha Quadrant." He refers to them as the hundreds of EMH Mark 1s, identical to him in every aspect. He states, "They've been condemned to a menial existence, scrubbing conduits, mining dilithium." There's a long history of writers drawing attention to the plight of the oppressed. Now, the resolution of this episode leaves much to be worked on for synthetic rights. In the episode Lifeline, we find out that there are in fact 675 Mark 1s that exist and are mining dilithium. The episode Author concluded with the remarks, and perhaps realization for Janeway and the crew, that Starfleet has in fact created a new life in the Doctor. She states, "Centuries ago, in most places on Earth, only landowners of a particular gender and race had any rights at all. Over time, those rights were extended to all humans. Now we're asking that you expand that definition once more to include our Doctor. The Doctor is a person, as real as any flesh and blood that I have ever known." She states to the Arbiter that if he believes the testimony of today, it's only fair to grant the Doctor the same right as anyone else.
Now, the Arbiter himself, in response to this, says that the Doctor exhibits many of the traits we associate with a person: intelligence, creativity, ambition, even fallibility. But are these traits real, or is the Doctor merely programmed to simulate them? To be honest, I don't know. He states that the issue of holographic rights will not go away, but at this time he will merely grant the Doctor the right of being an artist. He has simply determined that we don't know if holograms are or can become sentient. We still see 4 months later, ironically in this forward jump, Voyager is actually already home, that the Mark 1s are still enslaved mining dilithium.
So they never really learned from any of the past mistakes, and they had no interest in correcting anything and moving forward. They just kind of brush it off and put it to the side and just get them little rights. And this leaves a lot of threads, I suppose. And Colm, do you think that these themes are important and should be discussed in Star Trek Picard?
It's a bit of a Pandora's box, in my opinion, they've opened here, because they've actually created a whole different species by having all these artificial intelligences. And it is essentially what they are, artificial intelligence. Whether or not artificial intelligence has the same rights as you or I, they need to address it. I don't know if Picard, if the writing team are good enough to actually address it properly. It remains to be seen, to be honest.
Yeah, because there's a lot going on in Star Trek Picard. We have obviously the whole Romulan thing, and obviously the search for Daj and all this, and then the underlying theme of the synthetic uprising and the search for Maddox. So, will they have the time with all of these storylines going on to further delve into this in a thoughtful and profound manner?
I mean, for all we know, they could just say, "Oh yeah, well, okay, let's just give them all rights. Great. Anything that's created, it has rights now."
It'd be a bit lazy, of course, because, you know...
It'd be so lazy, but it'd be so easy to do as well.
And it's an interesting theme that's been going on throughout Star Trek history, that how do we deal with these new life forms? As the Arbiter states, it's very hard for them to tell if these are real thoughts that these beings are having, or merely the simulation is so accurate that we're just projecting feelings onto them. AIs, of course, I suppose, are designed to mimic the human brain.
They're designed to be intelligent. Yeah. And after a certain degree of intelligence, that's sentience. Awareness of your own intelligence is sentience.
I just had a thought, Colm. Remember all of Star Trek Discovery Season 2 was based around the AI that isn't an AI, that wants to be an AI, trying to become sentient and take over the world. Do you remember how much they botched that horrific storyline?
I don't want to. Actually, I'd blocked that out completely.
I just realised that I don't want Picard to...
what if it's the same AI?
I don't want them to even try to answer this question. I just realised it during this review.
What if this AI from STD is actually the AI forming right now?
What if the AI was Maddox all along, and Maddox is in fact the original Starfleet android thing? Do you think that this moral quandary needs to be concluded now that we've spoken about the
now that we've really opened the box?
Yeah.
No, because we could get stuck in legislation and arbitration trying to hash out the rights of sentient life forms, and I don't know if it would make good TV.
I think it would, because in a manner of speaking, I feel like this is one of the darkest things about Star Trek, when you think about it, that they've created these life forms with personalities and that could potentially be sentient, and just condemned them to a life of servitude and slavery. But I feel like this show isn't the right one to cover it, because of course it's caught up with, this is Picard's initial return to Star Trek, and I feel like maybe a show even based around Robert Picardo's character of the Doctor is the right one to go forward to answer this question. Whether or not it would sell, I don't think so. But I think that this type of question needs a dedicated show to answer.
It's a difficult point to argue against, in my opinion, the sentience of these life forms. It's difficult to argue against it once you've... I suppose Starfleet hadn't seen what the Doctor had achieved in the Delta Quadrant. They hadn't seen what he'd done. They assumed he was obviously just there fixing sprained wrists.
Yeah, I suppose the Arbiter is
having just, normal conversations with people or replying to people. He hasn't had the experience of being with them. And it actually seems that the only time people actually hold the opinion that these life forms are sentient is when they get to know them, such as Maddox getting to know Data, and obviously the Arbiter or the Arbitrator getting to know the Doctor.
Yeah, even in the case of Lifeline, when the Doctor goes back to help his creator Louis Zimmerman, even Louis Zimmerman is just cold and distant to him, because he assumes he's just a rude EMH Mark 1 like the rest of them, and he doesn't want to get attached because of how disappointed he is with how his creation turned out. That it was only through getting to know him, just like Bruce Maddox, that he appreciated him and had a love and respect for him. That it's just the stories don't really do justice to what these artificial life forms have become. And I think that's what was significant about the crew of the Enterprise D, why they were so close to Data because obviously they worked with him. And then you'd always have the case of other people coming on board and being like, oh, you're the android, and just looking at him with this curiosity or almost
fear.
Yeah, fear. Almost talking to him like the Romulan guy did, was like, I know a host of cyberneticists that love to get their hands on you. They just talk down to him as this computer program that people would love to examine.
That just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and do you think this topic is almost like one of the darkest secrets in all of Starfleet, that they've enslaved their own creations? What do you think of that?
Well, I don't think they've done it deliberately. If you didn't know something was sentient and you were enslaving it, are you guilty of enslaving a sentient life form? Yes, but you're not necessarily guilty of doing it intentionally. They're too ignorant to realize what they're doing.
But we even saw it with characters like Picard with his argument with Moriarty about whether or not he's sentient. It was almost like Picard doesn't want to believe that he's sentient because it's more convenient for him to just view him as a computer program. And obviously he hasn't seen Moriarty grow like he did with Data. So even at that point, he's trying to keep him at an arm's length because what you don't know can't hurt you. So if he doesn't think that he's sentient, he won't feel guilty or upset about shutting him off or just sticking him in a closet or in the computer memory banks for 4 years.
In conclusion, Starfleet in-universe never learned or developed from Measure of a Man, and the destruction of the Utopia Planitia Shipyards were an inevitability for their arrogance.
And that about wraps up this discussion. So if you liked what you saw here, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. And as we said, make sure to comment if there's anything you'd like us to cover, because we will definitely be interested in what you have to say. For the Hologrumps, I've been Liam.
And I'm Colin.
Take care.